Mario. I know him, you know him, everybody knows him. And that's because of this game right here. Super Mario Bros. Is one of the most famous video games of all time, and for good reason. It helped to revitalize the video game industry, popularize the platforming genre, kickstarted an IP that would go on to make billions of dollars, and its influence can still be felt to this day. So, it must be a pretty incredible game then, right? Well, in 1985, yeah, it was. There was nothing else like Super Mario Bros. It was this innovative and exciting new leap forward for video games that was leagues ahead of its competition. Once you played Super Mario Bros., there was no going back. Like what? Were you gonna play Pitfall instead? No, of course you weren't. That shit was lame. Mario was awesome. But you might have noticed that we don't live in 1985 anymore. In fact, 1985 was 40 years ago. That means the people who played Super Mario Bros. When it came out look like this now. And a lot of older video games also haven't aged so well either. Games that were once revolutionary are now antiquated and boring, filled with all of the mistakes that could only be recognized after they were already made. So after 40 years, how well does the original Super Mario Bros. Hold up? Is it a timeless classic, or has it aged about as well as a bottle of milk? Well, bottoms up, I guess. Super Mario Bros. Is a game that gets straight to the point. You boot it up, press start, and then the game begins. Simple as that. This isn't a unique characteristic of Super Mario Bros. Though. Pretty much all retro and classic games are like this too, and I think that's a big part of what makes them so appealing. Nowadays, it can take around 30 seconds to a minute to start playing a game. Like, there's always a few logos you have to sit through, maybe an opening cutscene you have to skip, and when you go to start the game, you typically still have to wait for a bit on a loading screen too. Obviously, there isn't much developers can do about this since games are so big now, and while this waiting isn't unbearable or anything, it does waste a bit of the player's time. But with retro games, you pretty much don't have to wait at all, and that convenience is still really nice. The first level of Super Mario Bros. Is 1-1, and it acts as the tutorial of the game. Even 40 years later, this tutorial is basically still perfect, and that's because it actually takes the psychology of its players into consideration. For example, the level starts with Mario facing right, which subtly indicates to the player that this is the way they should be going. When you see a Goomba for the first time, you'll intuitively know that it's an enemy, because it looks angry and it's walking straight towards you. Coins make for a great collectible because people like money. Especially Nintendo. And all of the major obstacles in 1-1 require you to learn how Mario controls in order to get past them. To get past the first Goomba, you need to learn how to jump. And to get past this pipe, you need to learn that you can hold the A button to make Mario jump higher. It's such a simple and intuitive way to teach the player how the game works, but I think what really makes 1-1 so great is that it doesn't feel like a tutorial at all. There aren't any pop-up messages or people telling you what to do, you just get to play the game, learning how it works as you go along. And if you already do know what to do, then you can just sprint straight through to the end if you want to. It's a level that accommodates both beginners and pros, and that's something that so many games still consistently fail to do to this day. Like, for the love of God, just let me skip these tutorials if I want to. 1-1 also has a few secrets that encourage replayability. For example, once you reach the next level, you'll be shown that Mario can also go down pipes, and you can use that knowledge to get to 1-1's bonus room. Pretty neat. However, while 1-1 is very well designed, it's ultimately still a pretty simple level, and I think the same is true of the rest of Super Mario Bros. Too. Like, nothing in it is really gonna blow your mind or anything. Of course, hardware limitations are mostly to blame for that. The NES could only do so much on its own, and eventually, special chips had to be put into game cartridges in order to enhance the power of the system. This is why later NES games, like Kirby's Adventure, have so much more going on in them. Plus, this game was developed for a cartridge that had a lot of space on it, and the developers also had a lot of experience programming for the NES at that point. Super Mario Bros., however, was developed at the very beginning of the NES's life, and it had to be developed for a standard cartridge, which had no extra capabilities and very little space. So little space, in fact, that the entire game only ended up being 40 kilobytes big. This is actually why you can't go backwards in Super Mario Bros. 2. In order to save space, the game literally has to unload previous parts of the level so that new parts of the level can be loaded in ahead of you. But despite all the limitations the developers faced, I still think they managed to do a lot with what little they had. Visually, while the overworld levels might all look kind of similar at a glance, there's actually a surprising amount of variety among them. Some levels have hills and bushes, some have fences and trees. There's a few levels that seem to take place at night, and I think these trees are covered in snow, maybe? There's also this weird grayscale level in World 6 too, which I think looks pretty neat. As for the underground levels, they all look exactly the same, but there aren't that many in the game, and the blue and black color palette is so good that I don't really mind anyways. The castle levels look pretty good too. The gray bricks and black backgrounds give them a distinctly ominous mood. Of course, when compared to more modern pixel art games like Shovel Knight or Celeste, you could say that Super Mario Bros. Looks pretty bland, but at the very least, it does try, and while it might not be the most detailed game, I think the overall style it goes for holds up pretty well. In particular, most of the character and enemy designs still look really great. They're simple, but very memorable. My favorite looking enemy in the game is definitely the Bullet Bill. I just love that they have these useless little arms. It's such a silly design. I'm not such a huge fan of how Toad looks in this game, though. I mean, doesn't he just look kinda dumb? Like, why is he looking directly at the screen and not at Mario? Probably because he wants to flip us all the bird, the little bastard. And I have to say, Princess Peach also looks particularly gormless in this game, too. As for the main man himself, I mean, what can I say? It's Mario. He's iconic. This definitely isn't my favorite Mario design, but it does the job. Honestly, the only thing in this game that might even be more iconic than Mario himself is the music. Super Mario Bros.' overworld theme is probably one of the most recognizable pieces of music in existence, and understandably so. I think it's genuinely one of the most memorable and catchy songs ever made. Is it the best song ever made? No, I don't even think it's the best Mario song ever made, but it is undeniably classic. I've probably heard it hundreds of times in my life, and despite how often it's been remixed and remade, I'm still not sick of it yet. The underground theme is similarly memorable too, however, it is notably quite short, being only like 10 seconds long. Actually, every song in the game except the overworld theme is like this too. They're all only around 10 to 30 seconds long, and then they just repeat over and over. It's not a huge deal, since the levels in Super Mario Bros. Are pretty short too, but I think most of the game's music ended up being remade better in future titles. Since I'm on the topic of audio, I might as well take a moment to talk about the sound design in this game. It's perfect. Super Mario Bros. Still has some incredibly satisfying sound effects. The jump sounds bouncy, bricks sound crunchy when they break, and when you hit your head on a ceiling, it goes like... Then there's the iconic power-up sound and that sweet, sweet one-up jingle. This game sounds awesome, okay? But you probably didn't click on this video to hear me talk about sound effects, so let's finally move on to what you've all been waiting for. The story. In-game, it isn't referenced very often. In fact, you won't even know what the main objective is until you beat the first world. Instead, most of the game's story is told in the manual, and I'll go ahead and read it all for you now. One day, the kingdom of the peaceful mushroom people was invaded by the Koopa, a tribe of turtles famous for their black magic. The quiet, peace-loving mushroom people were turned into mere stones, bricks, and even field horsehair plants, and the Mushroom Kingdom fell into ruin. The only one who can undo the magic spell on the mushroom people and return them to their normal selves is the Princess Toadstool, the daughter of the Mushroom King. Unfortunately, she is presently in the hands of the great Koopa Turtle King. Mario, the hero of the story, in parentheses, maybe, hears about the Mushroom People's plight and sets out on a quest to free the Mushroom Princess from the evil Koopa and restore the fallen kingdom of the Mushroom People. You are Mario. It's up to you to save the Mushroom People from the black magic of the Koopa. Okay, I'll be honest. The only reason I read that was because I thought it was kind of funny. I think everybody already knows what the plot to Super Mario Bros. Is. Obviously, it's basic, but I don't think it needs to be anything more than what it is. Super Mario Bros. Is a game first and foremost, and the story is just there to contextualize the gameplay, which I think is perfectly fine. Not all games need to have some rich or complex story, they can just be fun to play. So, how is the gameplay in Super Mario Bros. Then? Does it still hold up? I'll be honest, I am not a huge fan of how Mario controls in this game. He just feels so heavy and clunky, like it really takes him a second to get moving, and his air control is absolutely abysmal. When you make a jump in this game, there is no going back, because you can barely move Mario around once he's in the air. And this can make doing something as simple as trying to grab a power-up a deadly affair. In Mario 3, I would have no problem making jumps like these, but in the first game, you have to take them so slowly. Go any faster, and boom, you're dead. I've played Super Mario Bros. Enough times that I've gotten used to its physics by now, but nearly every Mario game that came after this one just plays so much better. In Mario Maker, Nintendo even changed the physics of the original game so that it would play more like the other games. If that isn't damning, then I don't know what is. This is easily one of my biggest problems with Super Mario Bros. The controls just feel dated, and they only end up making the game more difficult and frustrating, which obviously isn't very good for a game all about platforming. Super Mario Bros. Also has a few arcade mechanics in it as well, and they bring with them some pretty mixed results. The live system is the least problematic inclusion to me. I think there's definitely an argument to make against having lives in video games, but in Super Mario Bros., they do at least have an impact on the gameplay, and they aren't just some completely redundant inclusion. There are real stakes for getting a game over in Super Mario Bros. It means you have to restart the entire game, and that makes your lives incredibly important. The game doesn't just give lives to you for free either, you have to find and earn them. Of course, taking the player all the way back to the start of the game is a pretty brutal punishment though, and it was clearly implemented as a way to artificially pad out the game's length. Super Mario Bros. Isn't a very long game, so to make up for that, the developers just made it harder to beat, and this design philosophy can be seen in many other NES games. Thankfully though, there are secret warp zones throughout the game which can take you to any world you want, so if you do get a game over, you can just use a warp pipe to regain your progress. Another arcade mechanic in Super Mario Bros. Is the timer, which determines how long you can stay in a level before you lose. In arcade games, timers were implemented in order to keep people from endlessly playing the same game, so once your time was up, you either had to move on or pay up to keep playing. But why does Super Mario Bros. Have a timer? Fuck if I know! You literally own the game, so you don't have to share it with anyone else, and you definitely don't have to jam quarters into your NES to keep playing. There is genuinely no reason for this timer to be in the game. It's literally just an arcade convention that the developers brought over because they were used to other games having them. Does that mean all timers are bad? No. I think some of the later Mario games were able to find interesting uses for them, but in the first game, I don't think the timer adds anything significant to the experience. This game also has a point system too, which why? Points made sense in arcade games since most of them didn't have an ending, so your goal would just be to collect as many points as possible until you ran out of lives. But in Super Mario Bros., there is an ending, so beating the game takes precedence over collecting points. And the points don't even do anything anyways! I guess watching your score go up at the end of each level is kind of satisfying, but it ultimately doesn't matter because the game can't even save your high score. Once you turn the console off, those points are gone. Forever. So what's the point? Still, this point system stuck around in the series for a long time afterwards, and later games were able to find some interesting things to do with it. In Mario 3, collecting a certain amount of points unlocked a little bonus minigame, and in 3D World, points were used to make the multiplayer more competitive. Super Mario Bros. Also has a multiplayer mode too, though it's pretty lackluster. First of all, it's turn-based, meaning two people can't actually play at the same time. Plus, both players have to go through the game separately. If you beat the first level as Mario, Luigi still has to beat the first level too. So the goal of this game mode is pretty much just to see who can make it the farthest without getting a game over. If you actually want to play through the game together with someone, then you'd be better off just sticking to the single player and passing the controller back and forth. Alright, but how about that level design? 1-1 is still an incredibly designed level, so surely the rest of the levels hold up just as well, right? No! Before I get into the bad stuff, though, I do want to talk about what this game does right with its level design. I mentioned before how I thought the developers were able to do a lot with what little they had, and I think that especially shows in the level design. The game doesn't have that many mechanics, but the developers were able to make the most of what they had by consistently ramping up the challenge of each mechanic and by combining them with others. In the first world, the platforming is relatively easy, there are plenty of power-ups, and the enemies aren't very dangerous. But by the fourth world, the game becomes much more difficult. There are harder jumps to make, moving platforms, more dangerous enemies, and fewer power-ups. Then, in the final world, there's bullet bills everywhere, hammer bros, the power-ups are hidden, and you'll have to make some extremely difficult jumps. This thorough exploration of all of the mechanics gives Super Mario Bros. A pretty consistent difficulty curve, which is something that even today's games can struggle to achieve. Unfortunately, though, I do think that some of the other limitations Super Mario Bros. Had to accommodate for end up holding it back. For starters, I really don't like that you can't go backwards in this game. Having the screen only scroll forward makes it all too easy to screw yourself over, either by accidentally walking too far away from an item or secret, or by giving yourself less room to platform. The screen also makes it impossible to get any items that might have accidentally bounced away, which is really frustrating. To save on space, the developers also reused a few levels in the game too. For example, 5-3 is just 1-3 but with bullet bills, 7-3 is 1-3 but with more enemies, and World 5 has the same castle as World 2, the only difference being the amount of fire bars present. I don't hate that the developers did this, but for a game with only 32 short levels, I do think it's a bit of a shame that they aren't all unique. But I would gladly take more repeat levels over... The water levels in this game are pretty rough. Remember how 1-1 was designed to teach the player the mechanics of the game? Well, the first water level doesn't do that. Instead, you just get tossed straight in and are then expected to get past one of the hardest enemies in the game, even though the controls are now completely different. There's nothing to get you acclimated or prepared. Nope, just get good, dumbass. And the developers thought this level was so good that they even decided to reuse it too. There are only 2 full water levels in the game, and they are both nearly identical. One of them just has more bloopers and fish. But the pain doesn't end there. In 5-2 and 6-2, there are warp pipes that'll take you to these little underwater areas, and I despise them. You'll go down a warp pipe thinking that you'll get to go to an underground bonus room with coins or power-ups, but instead, you get pain. And just because the game hates you, there's also an underwater section in the final castle as well. Now, I understand why the developers put these water levels in the game. They wanted to add some variety to the experience, but the problem with them, and also just water levels in general, is that they often don't complement the core gameplay. Super Mario Bros. Is a game built around running, jumping, and stomping on enemies, so by taking those things away from the player, the game just ends up losing a big part of what makes it fun. I want to be platforming, not trying to awkwardly swim through a bunch of fish. There are definitely ways to make water levels enjoyable, but they just do not work in this game. Then there's the maze levels. Yay! The gimmick with these levels is that you have to find the right route to proceed, and if you pick the wrong one, then you have to try again. Unsurprisingly, this sucks, and there's nothing in the game to clue you in on the right way to go. You literally just have to guess. These levels are legitimately of the same quality as any of the shitty pick-the-right-door levels people would create in Mario Maker. They are just not fun at all. I think the castle levels in general are also just some of the weaker levels in the game, too. They all feel pretty samey, and they each end with a fight against Bowser. The developers definitely tried to add some variety to these fights by changing up the obstacles present in each arena, but still, I think it'd be better if the game just had more bosses. I do like that all of the Bowsers before the final world are just normal enemies in disguise, though. It's a pretty cool little detail. Once you beat the real Bowser, the game is then over, and the ending goes exactly how you'd expect. You save the princess, she says thanks, and then you're just unceremoniously booted back to the title screen. It's pretty underwhelming. However, once you finish the game, you're also given access to a second quest, which turns all of the Goombas into Buzzy Beetles, makes the enemies faster, and makes some of the platforms smaller. It's basically a New Game Plus, one of the first ever put into a video game. It doesn't change the game too significantly, but I think it's cool that it was added anyway. And that's Super Mario Bros. It has its ups and downs, but other than that, it's quite the standard Mario experience. I mean, literally, it is the most standard Mario can get. At this point, it's essentially the baseline of the entire series. And honestly, I think that's only made the game age worse. Because Super Mario Bros. Was the first game in the series, every Mario game that came after it was able to build off of what it had started, and create an even greater experience in the process. Just 3 years after Super Mario Bros. Came out, Nintendo released Super Mario Bros. 3, and it completely blew the first game out of the water. And now that game has been outdone by even better 2D platformers. So when I'm in the mood to play a 2D platformer, the original Super Mario Bros. Is almost never the first game that comes to my mind. Oftentimes, the only reason I do end up replaying it is because it's so short and easy to get into. If I have a bit of time to kill, I can just turn the game on and play it for a bit, without having to worry about finishing it later. So, does that mean Super Mario Bros. Doesn't hold up after all these years? Well, yes and no. On one hand, I think the controls are a bit dated. Some of the levels are pretty bad, and the game can feel bland compared to later entries in the series. But on the other hand, some of the levels are still incredibly well made, the character designs are great, and the music is extremely memorable. In some ways, the game is truly timeless, but in other ways, it has clearly aged. Personally, I still think Super Mario Bros. Is worth playing at least once, just because it is such an important part of gaming history, and if you want, you could even just play one of the remasters for a smoother experience instead. The most well-known remaster of Super Mario Bros. Is definitely Super Mario All-Stars, which is a compilation of all of the NES Mario games remade for the SNES. This version of the game has much more detailed visuals, new music, a save system, and it even tells you when you're going the right way in the maze levels, which is great. However, the rest of the game plays almost exactly the same as the original, so it still has most of the same problems too. Plus, they also messed up how Mario interacts with bricks. In the original game, Mario just falls right back down after hitting a brick, but in All-Stars, he keeps going up for a little bit, which might not seem like a big deal, but it is kind of annoying. So instead of playing Super Mario All-Stars, you should really play the fan-made remaster of Super Mario Bros. That came out just recently. It's pretty incredible. Like, first of all, you can play the game in full screen, which is awesome, but more importantly, it also uses the updated Mario Maker movement, and you can actually go backwards through levels now. Those two changes alone make the game so much more enjoyable to play. And I'm sure you've also noticed that the visuals look a lot fancier too. The backgrounds are more detailed and have a scroll effect, there are particle effects in some levels, and some of the worlds even have proper themes. The levels in these worlds use the new music Koji Kondo made for Mario Maker too, which is really cool. But maybe you don't like all of these fancy new changes. Well, don't worry, this remaster is insanely customizable. If you want, you can make it look and play more like the original. Or you can go in the complete opposite direction and make the game feel even more modern. This remaster also allows you to load in custom resource packs, which can even further update the look of the game, or just change it entirely. Like, look at this, I'm playing Super Mario Bros. With the visuals of Super Mario Bros. 2. You can't even tell me that's not awesome. And on top of all that, there's an entirely new game mode where you can race against Boos. If you're struggling to get into the original Super Mario Bros., then this remaster is absolutely the version to play instead. It irons out most of the kinks of the original game, while also updating it to fit more modern standards, and the sheer amount of options you are given ensures that you can have the best experience possible. This remaster is genuinely an incredible tribute to Super Mario Bros.' legacy, and it easily surpasses Nintendo's own sad, shallow, and greedy attempt to celebrate Mario's 40th anniversary. A game as revolutionary and famous as Super Mario Bros. Deserves the kind of treatment this remaster provides. And sure, while I don't personally love the game, that doesn't mean I don't also recognize how important it is. Super Mario Bros. Paved the way forward for future 2D platformers, and had it never been made, some of my favorite games likely wouldn't exist either. And for that, I am extremely grateful. If you're interested in Super Mario Bros. Remastered, I've left a link to its download in the description, though do keep in mind that you'll need a ROM of the original game in order to play it. This remaster also comes bundled with a few extra games too, like the obscure Special and All Night Nippon versions of Super Mario Bros., plus the lost levels. Oh god, I'm gonna have to make a video on that next, aren't I?